how will we win? We will win only if we're united, because we know the US is divided. And we know they're particularly divided on this issue of tariffs.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And we know that many states that are Republican states don't agree with the tariffs. And the Democrats know also that the tariffs may be a way for them to get back in the game in terms of having a message that is resonating more with Americans. That's what we're hearing. This is just a fact.
Oh, no. No.
And so, based on that, we need to find a way to stay united, including on energy, including on things that technically have divided us sometimes, somehow. But now it's our entire economy. It's all the jobs across the country that are at stake, Michael. It's not one job more in Atlantic Canada, where you're from, or here, or in Alberta. It's all important. Just to give you an example, we send, the US is relying on our uranium for 95% of their consumption. That is fundamental to all the nuclear sites that are powering many home heating systems across Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, etc. There is over-reliance also on hydro in Ontario and in Quebec. The entire Northeast grid is linked to Ontario and Quebec. Fertilizers, $1.7 billion more that it would cost in terms of if we would put tariffs, export tariffs on potash for farmers in the US, which they all rely on Saskatchewan potash. And of course, there's oil and gas. Mm-hmm. We haven't put that on the table yet, guys. We kept that in our game, in our cards, as cards that we could potentially play if this would escalate. And the US knows that. So that's why $155 billion worth of tariffs is of American merchandise coming to Canada. But in order for us to be using any other new cards, we need to make sure that Canadians are on board and that premiers are on board. And I think that we've seen bit by bit even more unity coming out of the Council of Premiers, which is important. And I think that the future Prime Minister that will be elected over the weekend will have to put that as a clear priority. Because, of course, we are in this for a long run. I'm not saying necessarily the trade war, but the unpredictability coming out of the White House. And, President Trump is duly elected. He's a legitimate democratic leader, and he's elected for the next 4 years. In terms of, reinforcing our economy, that's why I said we won't let a good crisis go to waste. Mm-hmm. Canada was created, founded, based on the fact that we didn't want to be the US. And even my folks in my own province at the time decided to choose to do this partnership with, basically English Canadians, and to make sure that we would create this country. This is the partnership between John A. Macdonald and Georges-Étienne Cartier. That's what happened 150 years ago. It's in our DNA. It's in our history. And of course, at the time, we were also a dominion of the UK, of Great Britain. We have to become closer and make sure that we don't only think north-south, we think east-west. This is how our country was built. And we need to have the right infrastructures across the country to make sure that that's the case. This is an opportunity to create growth, to make sure that there's no internal barriers between provinces and territories. So that's also why we need stronger unity.
Finally!
And at the same time, we need to make sure that we create that growth and that real free trade amongst ourselves. Only that would be able to mend a huge part of the gap that is created by the tariffs in the US. And then we need to diversify, and we need to make sure that we look at other countries. The UK is an obvious one. Why? Because the UK, after Brexit, needs to be also closer to different countries. And we're an obvious choice, but also we should be closer to the EU. We have a free trade agreement with the EU. We also have, we're very close to South Korea and Japan. So all the G7, that's worth it. And I could go on and on and on. But just to give you a bit of context of what I went through 2 weeks ago, well, last week, I did an entire tour of the European capitals. Mm-hmm. So I went to Paris to meet with the French. I went to Germany, also at the Munich Security Conference. I went to Brussels to meet with the EU leaders, and also to London. And meanwhile, I went to South Africa for the G20.
Yeah.
That just was not on the way, but basically, why not? Based on that, what happened is I was amazed how much I was explaining to my colleagues what was going on in the US and how much they hadn't absorbed what was coming out of the White House. And they were surprised about the analysis I was giving. But also, I realized how much we live in a North American context, and they don't. And so our job is to explain to them what's going on, because we're the canary in the coal mine. And they're next. And indeed, this week, when President Trump said 25% tariffs against the EU, I wrote to them, I told you.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that now, and obviously also what happened on Ukraine, we're getting closer and closer to the Europeans, and as we should. But now, I can do the job, and the Prime Minister can do the job, and the future Prime Minister can do the job.
Are you serious?
But what fundamentally needs to happen, Rosal, is to make sure that you guys go and do business with Europe. And that we create these pathways to make sure that ultimately you're able to do more business with the UK and with Europe. And that flow of business needs to be able to happen as well.
Okay.